He laughed. Standing at the front of a lecture hall packed with 200 students, Professor William Harrison laughed at the young woman who had just raised her hand. "You want to attempt this problem?" He gestured at the equation sprawled across the whiteboard, a mess of symbols and numbers that looked more like ancient hieroglyphics than mathematics. "Miss Chen, this problem has defeated some of the greatest mathematical minds of our generation." "And you think you can solve it?" The classroom fell silent. My dear friends, wherever you're watching from tonight, whether you're in Texas or Toronto, Manila or Manchester, what you're about to witness is one of the most remarkable stories of our time. Because that young woman, she didn't just solve the problem, she did it in 10 minutes. And what happened next would expose a decades-long deception, destroy a professor's career, and rewrite the history of mathematics itself. But before we get there, you need to understand something. This isn't just a story about genius. It's a story about what happens when the people who are supposed to lift us up choose to push us down instead. Maya Chen was 22 years old when she walked into Professor Harrison's advanced mathematics seminar at Whitmore University. She was a transfer student from a community college in rural Ohio, the first person in her family to attend a 4-year university. Her father ran a dry cleaning shop. Her mother worked double shifts at a local hospital. They had sacrificed everything to give their daughter a chance at a better life. And Professor William Harrison? He took one look at her transcript, saw the name of her community college, and decided she didn't belong. "Community college students," he told a colleague over coffee, "simply don't have the foundation for advanced mathematical theory. It's not their fault. They were never given the proper preparation." What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Maya Chen had been solving complex equations since she was 7 years old. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the day Maya Chen first stepped foot on that campus. Let me tell you something about Maya Chen, my dear friends. She was not born into privilege. She was not given every advantage. But she was given something far more valuable. A mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. At age 7, while other children were learning their multiplication tables, Maya was filling notebook after notebook with equations she invented herself. Her parents didn't understand what she was doing, but they understood it was important. "Let her work," her father would say when relatives suggested she should be outside playing. "She's building something." By 12, Maya had exhausted every math course her small-town school could offer. By 16, she was auditing classes at the local community college, the only institution within 50 miles that would let a teenager sit in on advanced coursework. Professor James Wheeler, a retired mathematician who taught part-time at that community college, recognized Maya's gift immediately. "This girl," he told his wife one evening, "could be one of the great mathematical minds of her generation, if she gets the right opportunities." But opportunities don't come easily when you're poor, when your family lives paycheck to paycheck, when the zip code you were born into determines what doors will open for you. Maya graduated from community college with a perfect 4.0 GPA and transferred to Whitmore University on a partial scholarship. She would have to work 2 jobs to cover the rest, tutoring younger students and shelving books at the campus library until midnight. She arrived on campus with 1 suitcase, $200 in her savings account, and a dream that had sustained her through 18 years of being underestimated. That first week, she walked the tree-lined paths between the Gothic buildings, past students whose parents had bought them new cars and paid their full tuition, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. This was it. This was where her life would finally begin. She had no way of knowing that Professor William Harrison had already decided she would fail. Now, to understand what happened next, you need to know something about Professor William Harrison himself. Professor William Harrison was, by all outward appearances, exactly what a distinguished mathematician should be. Silver hair swept back from a high forehead, wire-rimmed glasses that he would remove dramatically when making a point. Tweed jackets with leather elbow patches. a voice that could fill a lecture hall without a microphone. He had been at Whitmore University for 23 years. He had published dozens of papers. He had supervised countless doctoral students. His name appeared in textbooks used around the world. But there was something Professor Harrison had never done. He had never solved an original problem. Oh, he was brilliant at explaining other people's work, brilliant at building on established theories, brilliant at the politics of academia, knowing whose hand to shake, whose research to praise, whose career to quietly undermine. But true mathematical genius, the kind that sees what no one else can see, that spark had eluded him his entire career. It was the open secret of the mathematics department. William Harrison was a showman, not a pioneer, a performer, not an innovator, and he knew it. Deep down, beneath all the confidence and the credentials, William Harrison was terrified that one day someone would figure out he wasn't as brilliant as he pretended to be. So he did what insecure people often do. He tore down anyone who might expose his limitations. Over the years, he had driven out 3 graduate students whose work threatened to overshadow his own. He had torpedoed the tenure applications of 2 junior faculty members who had dared to question his methods. He had built a reputation as a gatekeeper, someone who decided who belonged in the world of advanced mathematics and who didn't. And when Maya Chen walked into his classroom, this community college transfer student with her second-hand textbooks and her quiet confidence, something in William Harrison recognized a threat. Not consciously, perhaps, but somewhere deep in his lizard brain, an alarm sounded. This girl was dangerous. This girl could see things he couldn't. This girl needed to be stopped. The first day of class, Professor Harrison made his intentions clear. Advanced mathematical theory met every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m. in Whitmore Hall, room 301. Maya arrived 15 minutes early on the first day. She chose a seat in the front row, close enough to see every detail on the whiteboard, close enough to catch every nuance of the professor's explanations. She had her notebook open, her pencil ready, her mind hungry for knowledge. Professor Harrison walked in at exactly 9, surveyed the room, and began calling roll. Anderson, here. Blackwell, here. Chambers, here. He continued down the list, pronouncing each name clearly and correctly, until he reached Chen? Maya Chen? He said it wrong. Deliberately wrong. Mispronouncing her first name as if it were a word he had never encountered before. Maya raised her hand. It's pronounced Maya, Professor. Harrison looked at her over his glasses. Looked at her for a long moment as if examining something unpleasant on the bottom of his shoe. Ah, yes, the transfer student. He made the words sound like a diagnosis. From, where was it? Some community college in Ohio? Riverside Community College, sir. He made a note on his roster. Well, Miss Chen, I hope you understand that this course requires a level of preparation that most transfer students simply don't possess. If you find yourself struggling, I encourage you to drop down to the introductory track. The classroom was silent. 200 students watched the exchange, some with sympathy, some with the cruel fascination of spectators at a blood sport. Maya felt her face flush, but her voice remained steady. Thank you for your concern, Professor. I'll do my best. Harrison smiled thinly. I'm sure you will, Miss Chen. I'm sure you will. He moved on to the next name, and Maya Chen learned her first lesson at Whitmore University, not about mathematics, but about the kind of man who would be grading her work for the next semester. From that day forward, Professor Harrison never missed an opportunity to remind Maya of her place. When she raised her hand to answer questions, he called on someone else. When she submitted assignments, he found flaws that didn't exist in identical work from other students. When she visited his office hours seeking guidance, he kept her waiting for 45 minutes, then told her he had a meeting. But Maya Chen did not break. She did not drop the course. She did not transfer to the introductory track. Instead, She worked harder, studied longer, proved again and again that she belonged. 3 months passed, and then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday morning in late October when Professor Harrison wrote something unusual on the whiteboard. Not the day's lesson, not a theorem from the textbook, but a problem, a sprawling serpentine equation that filled the entire board from edge to edge. "This," he announced, "is the Morrison-Hayes conjecture." The classroom leaned forward. Even students who usually spent lectures scrolling through their phones sat up straighter. Proposed in 1987 by Professors Morrison and Hayes at Cambridge, it deals with the behavior of prime number distributions across multidimensional spaces. Harrison smiled, clearly enjoying the attention. In simpler terms, it's a question about whether certain patterns in numbers are universal or merely coincidental. He set down his chalk. For 35 years, the greatest mathematical minds in the world have attempted to solve this problem. Fields Medal winners, National Academy members, entire research teams with unlimited funding. He paused for effect. All of them have failed. The class murmured. Harrison raised his hand for silence. "I present this to you today not as an assignment, God forbid, but as a lesson in humility. This problem represents the boundary of human mathematical achievement. It shows us that for all our advances, for all our technology, some mysteries remain beyond our reach." He turned back to the board, gazing at the equation with something like reverence. "If anyone in this room believes they can solve this problem, I invite you to come forward." He chuckled. "Consider it a free A for the semester." It was a joke, of course, a provocation designed to amuse himself and humble his students. No one was supposed to take it seriously, but then Maya Chen raised her hand. The classroom went silent. A different kind of silent than before, the silence of collective disbelief. Professor Harrison turned slowly. His eyes found Maya in the front row, her hand raised, her face calm. "Miss Chen." His voice dripped with condescension. "You have a question?" "No, sir. I'd like to attempt the problem." Someone in the back row laughed nervously. Harrison's smile froze on his face. "I'm sorry. You'd like to what?" "I'd like to attempt the Morrison-Hayes conjecture, if the offer of a free A still stands." For a moment, Professor Harrison seemed genuinely speechless. Then his smile returned, wider and colder than before. "By all means, Miss Chen, come to the board." Maya stood up. 200 pairs of eyes followed her as she walked to the front of the room. Later, one of her classmates would describe it as watching someone walk to their own execution. But Maya didn't feel afraid. She felt, in that moment, something she would later describe as peace. "I prayed that morning," she would tell an interviewer years later. "I don't know why. I'm not usually religious. But something told me to pray. And when I stood up to walk to that board, I felt like I wasn't walking alone." What happened next would be studied in mathematics departments around the world for decades to come. Maya Chen stood before the whiteboard, chalk in hand, and stared at the Morrison-Hayes conjecture. Behind her, she could feel 200 students holding their breath. She could feel Professor Harrison's smug certainty that she would fail. She could feel the weight of every person who had ever told her she wasn't smart enough, wasn't prepared enough, wasn't good enough. But she didn't hear any of it. Because something was happening in her mind. Something that had happened only a handful of times before. When she was 7, solving problems her teachers couldn't explain. When she was 12, correcting errors in her college textbooks. When she was 16, proving a theorem her professor said was impossible. Maya Chen was seeing. Not with her eyes, with something deeper. Some part of her brain that operated on a different frequency than ordinary thinking. The equation on the board, which looked like chaos to everyone else, began to reveal its structure. Like one of those optical illusions where a random pattern suddenly resolves into a 3-dimensional image. She saw connections. Relationships. Patterns that had been hiding in plain sight for 35 years. The problem with previous approaches, she said softly, more to herself than to the class, is that they tried to solve it in 3 dimensions. She began to write. But if you fold the dimensional space, here and here, her chalk moved across the board with increasing speed, and apply a modified version of the Langlands correspondence. More writing, more symbols appearing as if summoned by magic. You can reduce the infinite recursion to a closed form. The classroom watched in stunned silence. Some students were filming on their phones. Others sat with their mouths literally hanging open. Professor Harrison's expression had shifted from condescension to confusion to something that looked increasingly like fear. Maya continued to write, line after line, page after page of elegant mathematical reasoning, each step building inevitably on the one before. 5 minutes passed, 7 minutes, 9 minutes, and then, at exactly 10 minutes and 14 seconds after she had first picked up the chalk, Maya Chen set it down. She turned to face the class. Done. The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone in that room had ever heard. For a long moment, no one moved. 200 students stared at the whiteboard, at the dense blocks of mathematical notation that Maya had produced in 10 minutes flat. Most of them couldn't follow the proof. It was far beyond anything covered in the course. But they could sense that something extraordinary had happened. They could see it in Professor Harrison's face. His expression had gone through several transformations during Maya's demonstration, from amused skepticism to puzzled attention to what could only be described as dawning horror. Now he stood frozen, his eyes moving across the whiteboard, following the logic of Maya's proof. That's... He stopped, swallowed, started again. That's not possible. I can walk you through each step if you'd like, Professor. Harrison didn't respond. He was still staring at the board, his lips moving silently as he worked through the equations. The dimensional folding technique, he muttered. No one's ever... My dear friends, I wish you could have seen what happened next. A student in the back row, a young man named Thomas, who would later become one of Maya's closest friends, started to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. Another student joined in, then another. Then the whole class was applauding, a thunderous ovation that echoed off the walls of room 301. Maya stood at the front of the classroom, chalk dust on her fingers, and for the first time allowed herself to smile. But Professor Harrison wasn't applauding. He was still staring at the board, and his hands were shaking. This needs to be verified, he said, his voice barely audible above the applause. I need to have someone else look at this. He pulled out his phone and made a call. The class gradually fell silent, watching. Dr. Lawson. Yes, I know you're teaching. This is urgent. Harrison's voice cracked slightly. I need you to come to room 301. Immediately. Bring the advanced topology team. He hung up and turned to face Maya. Miss Chen. For the first time since she had met him, Professor Harrison's voice held no condescension, no mockery. Only something that sounded almost like fear. What you've written here, if this is correct... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Within the hour, room 301 would be filled with the most accomplished mathematicians on campus, and they would all reach the same conclusion. Dr. Sarah Lawson was the head of Whitmore's Applied Mathematics Department. She had a Ph.D. from MIT, a list of publications as long as your arm, and a reputation for being impossible to impress. She walked into room 301 15 minutes after Harrison's call, flanked by 2 postdoctoral researchers and the department's specialist in number theory. The students had been asked to leave, but most of them were clustered in the hallway, unwilling to miss whatever happened next. Maya remained at the front of the room, answering questions about her approach while Harrison sat in a corner, looking like a man who had just watched his house burn down. Let me see it, Dr. Lawson said without preamble. She spent the next 45 minutes at the whiteboard, following Maya's proof line by line. Occasionally, she would ask a question. Occasionally, she would nod. Twice, she made small sounds of surprise. The postdoctoral researchers took photographs. The number theorist filled 3 pages of a notebook with his own calculations. Finally, Dr. Lawson stepped back from the board. "Well?" Harrison's voice was hoarse. Dr. Lawson turned to look at Maya Chen, this 22-year-old transfer student in her second-hand clothes, with chalk dust on her fingers and a patient expression on her face. "It's correct," she said. The words seemed to echo in the silent room. "The dimensional folding technique is entirely original. I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Lawson shook her head slowly. "It's not just a solution. It's a new mathematical framework, one that could potentially be applied to dozens of other unsolved problems." She walked over to Maya and extended her hand. "Miss Chen, I've been in this field for 30 years. I thought I had seen everything." She smiled, a genuine smile, not the polished professional version. "I was wrong. What you've done here today is extraordinary." Maya shook her hand. "Thank you, Dr. Lawson." "No, thank you." Lawson glanced at the whiteboard one more time. "The Morrison-Hayes conjecture. In 10 minutes, on a chalkboard in an undergraduate classroom." She laughed. "The mathematical community is going to lose its collective mind." In the corner, Professor William Harrison sat with his head in his hands. No one noticed. No one cared. But my friends, this story was far from over, because what happened next revealed a secret that had been buried for 35 years. Let me tell you a story within a story, my dear friends. In 1987, the same year the Morrison-Hayes conjecture was proposed, a young graduate student at Cambridge attended the lecture where it was first presented. His name was William Harrison. At 24 years old, Harrison was considered one of the most promising mathematical minds of his generation. His doctoral advisor had called him a future Fields Medal winner. His peers looked at him with a mixture of admiration and envy. When Morrison and Hayes presented their conjecture, Harrison became obsessed. He spent 3 years trying to solve it. 3 years of sleepless nights, of notebooks filled with failed approaches, of slowly watching his certainty crumble into doubt. He came close. Tantalizingly close. He developed partial solutions that advanced the field. He published papers that earned him recognition and respect. But the full solution eluded him. And eventually, William Harrison gave up. He told himself it didn't matter. He built a career on other achievements: teaching, publishing, accumulating the credentials that would make him a distinguished professor at a prestigious university. But somewhere deep inside, the Morrison-Hayes conjecture remained an open wound. He was supposed to solve it. He was supposed to be the one. So when Maya Chen walked to that whiteboard, this community college transfer student, this nobody from nowhere, and solved in 10 minutes what he couldn't solve in 3 years, something inside William Harrison broke. "I need to see the original work," he said, standing abruptly. His voice was strange, too loud, too sharp. She must have seen it somewhere, the dimensional folding technique. Someone must have published something similar. Dr. Lawson frowned. "William, I've followed this problem for decades. There's nothing in the literature that resembles what Miss Chen has done." Then she cheated somehow. She found the solution online. Professor Harrison. Maya's voice was quiet but firm. "I did not cheat. You couldn't have solved this. You don't have the background. You don't have the training. You're a community college student." The words hung in the air like a slap. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood what was really happening. This wasn't about the mathematics. This was about a man who couldn't accept that someone he had deemed inferior had succeeded where he had failed. What Harrison didn't know was that there were witnesses to his meltdown, and one of them was about to change everything. Remember those students clustered in the hallway? Remember how I told you some of them had been filming on their phones? One of those students was Jennifer Walsh, the editor of Whitmore's student newspaper. And she had captured everything, from Maya's initial approach to the board, through her 10-minute solution, to Professor Harrison's increasingly unhinged accusations. 3 hours after Maya solved the Morrison-Hayes conjecture, Jennifer's video was uploaded to the student newspaper's website. By midnight, it had been shared to Twitter. By morning, it had gone viral. "Professor humiliated by student he mocked," read one headline. "Community college transfer solves 35-year-old math problem in 10 minutes, read another. "Watch, professor's racist meltdown after student proves him wrong, read a third. Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 12 million times. Maya Chen's name was trending worldwide. And Professor William Harrison's career was in freefall. The university's phone lines were overwhelmed with calls. The dean's office received over 3,000 emails, some praising Maya, many more demanding Harrison's termination. Mathematicians around the world were downloading Maya's proof, verifying it, building on it. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the surviving originator of the conjecture, now 87 years old and living in a nursing home in Cambridge, asked for a phone call with Maya to personally thank her. It was, quite simply, the biggest story in the academic world in decades. And Professor William Harrison was no longer the protagonist. He was the villain. His decades of carefully constructed reputation, his awards and publications and prestigious appointments, all of it was being re-examined through a new lens. Former students came forward with stories of his cruelty. Colleagues admitted they had always known about his bias against non-traditional students. An investigation was launched into his grading practices. In attempting to tear down Maya Chen, William Harrison had destroyed himself. But the real confrontation was still to come. As the story spread, other voices began to emerge. First came Dr. Marcus Thompson, now a professor at Stanford. 15 years ago, he had been a graduate student at Whitmore, one of the few black doctoral candidates in the mathematics department. "Professor Harrison made my life hell," he told the Washington Post. "He questioned my abilities constantly. He gave my research ideas to other students. When I complained, I was told I was being oversensitive." Then came Dr. Lisa Park, currently at Princeton. 20 years ago, she had been a promising undergraduate at Whitmore, a Korean-American woman with a gift for number theory. "He told me I should consider a career in teaching rather than research," she said in a Twitter thread that went viral. Said women's minds weren't built for original mathematical thinking. I believed him for years. I almost quit the field entirely. Then came the internal documents. A reporter from the New York Times filed a Freedom of Information request and discovered a pattern stretching back decades. Student complaints that had been ignored. Tenure reviews that had been manipulated. A consistent history of bias against women, minorities, and students from non-traditional backgrounds. Professor William Harrison hadn't just been cruel to Maya Chen, he had been systematically gatekeeping mathematics for his entire career. And the institutions that should have stopped him, the department, the university, the academic establishment, had looked the other way. "This is bigger than one professor," wrote a columnist for Scientific American. "This is about who gets to do mathematics, who gets to be considered brilliant, who gets opportunities, and who gets doors slammed in their faces." Maya Chen, for her part, said little publicly about Harrison himself. When asked about his treatment of her, she gave the same response. "I'm not here to discuss Professor Harrison. I'm here to discuss mathematics." But her very existence, her success, her dignity, her refusal to be diminished, was the most powerful statement of all. She didn't need to tear him down. Her achievements did it for her. But even as the world turned against Professor Harrison, there was one more revelation waiting to emerge. Remember how I told you that William Harrison had spent 3 years trying to solve the Morrison-Hayes conjecture? Remember how I said he came close? The truth was more complicated than that. In 1990, Harrison had been working on the problem with a fellow graduate student named James Zhao. Together, they had developed several promising approaches, including an early version of what would eventually become Maya's dimensional folding technique. But before they could complete their work, something happened. James Joe was killed in a car accident. Harrison was devastated. He and James had been close friends as well as collaborators. For months afterward, he couldn't bring himself to continue their research. And then, according to documents uncovered by the Times investigation, something else happened. Harrison took credit for all of their joint work. He published papers based on their collaboration, papers that mentioned James only in a footnote, if at all. He built his early reputation on ideas that had been as much James's as his own. It was, in academic terms, a form of theft. Theft from a dead man who couldn't defend himself. My dear friends, I tell you this not to excuse Professor Harrison's behavior. Nothing excuses what he did to Maya and to all the students who came before her. But I tell you this because it helps explain the depth of his reaction in that classroom. When Maya solved the Morrison-Hayes conjecture, using a technique that evolved from the very approaches Harrison and Joe had pioneered together, it wasn't just professional jealousy that broke him. It was guilt. Guilt for what he had done to James's memory. Guilt for the career built on buried contributions. Guilt that had festered for 30 years, turning a promising young mathematician into a bitter gatekeeper. None of this justified his cruelty, but it explained how a person could become so twisted that they would try to destroy a young woman simply for being brilliant. Maya Chen represented everything William Harrison had failed to be, and he couldn't forgive her for it. But here's the thing about secrets, my friends. Once they start coming out, they don't stop. 1 week after solving the Morrison-Hayes conjecture, Maya Chen received a message. It was from Professor Harrison, sent to her university email at 3 a.m. Miss Chen, I would like to speak with you. Please come to my office tomorrow at 4 p.m. Alone. Maya's friends advised her not to go. Her parents, when she called them, begged her to stay away. Even Dr. Lawson said she would understand if Maya wanted nothing more to do with the man who had tormented her. But Maya went anyway. I needed to see him, she would explain later. Not for his sake, for mine. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, and I needed to show myself that I wasn't afraid. Harrison's office, when she arrived, looked like a man's life in collapse. Papers scattered everywhere, books pulled from shelves, award plaques taken down from the walls, leaving empty rectangles where they had hung. Harrison himself sat behind his desk, looking like he had aged 10 years in a week. Miss Chen, his voice was hoarse, thank you for coming. Maya sat down across from him. She said nothing. She waited. I've been trying to understand, Harrison said slowly, how you did it. The dimensional folding. I spent days going through your proof, step by step. He looked at her with something that might have been wonder. It's beautiful. The approach is so elegant, so simple once you see it. And I never saw it. In 3 years of trying, I never even came close to seeing it. Maya remained silent. I was the one who was supposed to solve it, Harrison continued. That's what I told myself. That's what I believed. For 30 years, I believed that if anyone was going to crack Morrison-Hayes, it would be me. His hands trembled on the desk. And then you walked into my classroom. You, with your community college transcript and your secondhand books and your quiet confidence. And something in me broke. He looked away. I told myself I was being rigorous, maintaining standards, protecting the integrity of the field. He laughed bitterly. But that was never what it was about. It was about fear. Fear that you were everything I pretended to be, and that everyone would see it. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. I owe you an apology, Harrison said. Not just for the classroom, for everything. Maya listened to his apology, and then she asked a question that would define the rest of their interaction. Professor Harrison, Maya said, can I ask you something? He nodded. When you were working on the conjecture, back in Cambridge with James Joe. What did it feel like? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean? I mean, what did it feel like when you were deep in the work? When you were chasing that solution? Before everything else, the career, the reputation, the politics, what was it that drew you to mathematics in the first place? Harrison was quiet for a long time. I had forgotten, he said finally. Until you asked just now, I had forgotten that there was ever anything else. He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. It felt like flying, like the universe was showing me its secrets, like I was part of something vast and beautiful and true. Maya nodded. That's what it feels like for me, too. She leaned forward. Professor, I could hate you. I would have every right to hate you for what you've put me through. For every time you skipped over my raised hand. For every unfair grade. For the way you said community college like it was a slur. Her voice was steady. But here's what I've learned. Hatred is heavy. It takes up space that I need for other things. For mathematics. For the work that actually matters. She stood up. I don't forgive you because you deserve it. I forgive you because I refuse to carry your weight any longer. What happens to you from here? Your career, your reputation, your legacy. That's not my concern. She walked to the door. But I hope, for your own sake, that you find your way back to what mathematics is supposed to be. Not a competition, not a gatekeeping mechanism, not a way to make yourself feel superior. She turned back one last time. Just flying. Just being part of something vast and beautiful and true. She left. Professor William Harrison sat alone in his dismantled office for a very long time. But this story isn't just about confrontation and forgiveness. It's about what comes after. In the weeks following their confrontation, the world continued to turn. The university launched a formal investigation into Professor Harrison's conduct. 3 decades of complaints, previously buried in administrative files, were finally being taken seriously. Former students who had been silenced were finally being heard. Maya's proof was published in the Annals of Mathematics, the most prestigious journal in the field. Her dimensional folding technique was already being applied to other problems. 3 separate universities offered her full doctoral scholarships with stipends. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the 87-year-old co-originator of the conjecture, gave her first interview in 15 years. I've been waiting 35 years for this moment, she said. I always believed someone would crack it. I just didn't expect her to be a 22-year-old from Ohio. My dear friends, wherever you are watching from tonight, I want you to understand something. This story isn't just about Maya Chen. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. Every person who has been underestimated because of where they came from. Every person who has had doors slammed in their faces by gatekeepers who couldn't see past their own limitations. I've read your comments. I know so many of you have your own Professor Harrisons, your own battles, your own moments of doubt when the weight of other people's expectations felt too heavy to carry. And I want you to know, your story isn't over. Maya Chen's parents flew to Whitmore for the university's celebration of her achievement. Her father, a man who had spent 40 years pressing other people's clothes, stood in a ballroom surrounded by professors and journalists and dignitaries, and he wept. I always knew, he said to a reporter, from when she was 7 years old, I always knew she was special. Her mother, standing beside him, simply smiled. We prayed for her every day, she said. Every single day since she was born. God is good. And maybe that's the real lesson of this story. Not the mathematics. Not the viral video. Not the downfall of a bitter man. But the faith of 2 parents who believed in their daughter when no one else did. Who sacrificed everything so she could have a chance. Who never stopped praying that she would find her place in the world. Some people call that luck. Some people call that destiny. I call it blessed. But my friends, the most powerful moment was yet to come. My dear friends, The conversation between Maya Chen and Dr. Eleanor Hayes lasted only 4 minutes. But those 4 minutes changed both of their lives. Dr. Hayes wept. At 87 years old, having spent half her life wondering if she and her late colleague had chased a phantom, she finally had her answer. "You did it," she kept saying. "You actually did it." Maya explained her approach, the dimensional folding technique, the way she had seen connections that others had missed. Dr. Hayes listened with the sharp attention of a mind that had never dulled with age. "Your method," Dr. Hayes said finally, "it's beautiful. It's exactly the kind of lateral thinking that William and Morrison and I could never quite achieve. We were too formal, too constrained by what we had been taught." She paused. "Sometimes it takes someone from outside the system to see what those inside cannot." When the call ended, Maya handed the phone back to Professor Harrison with trembling hands. The classroom remained standing. No one had sat down. No one had looked at their phones or whispered to their neighbors. For perhaps the first time in their academic careers, these students understood that they were witnessing something that mattered. Professor Harrison looked at Maya with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Humility. "Miss Chen," he said quietly so only she could hear, "I have spent 3 months treating you as if you were less than, as if your background, your circumstances, your path here somehow made you unworthy of respect." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong, not just factually wrong, morally wrong. And I am deeply, deeply sorry." Maya looked at this man who had caused her so much pain. This man who had questioned her intelligence, her belonging, her right to dream. And she made a choice. "I forgive you," she said. 3 words. But they carried the weight of everything she had endured, not just from him, but from everyone who had ever told her she wasn't enough. Professor Harrison's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve it. But thank you." But forgiveness and consequences are 2 different things, and what happened next proved that sometimes justice has a way of finding those who deserve it. Word travels fast in academic circles. By the time the lecture ended, the Dean of Mathematics had already received 17 emails, 4 phone calls, and 1 visit from Dr. Lawson herself. Dean Patricia Okonkwo arrived at Professor Harrison's office that afternoon. "William," she said, closing the door behind her, "I've been hearing some extraordinary claims about what happened in your classroom this morning." Harrison nodded. "They're all true. A transfer student solved the Morrison-Hayes conjecture in 10 minutes. "Yes. And you verified it yourself?" "Multiple times, as did Dr. Lawson." Dean Okonkwo sat down heavily in the chair across from Harrison's desk. "Do you understand what this means? For the university? For the field?" "I do." "And do you understand what I've also been hearing? About how you've treated this student for the past 3 months? Harrison's face went pale. "Patricia, Save it, William. I've received complaints from Miss Chen's academic advisor. From her dormitory, R.A. From 3 separate students who witnessed your behavior in class." She pulled out a folder. "Deliberate mispronunciation of her name, skipping over her raised hand, grading her papers more harshly than comparable work from other students. Comments about standards and background that could easily be interpreted as discriminatory." Harrison said nothing. "I was already planning to address these complaints," Dean Okonkwo continued. "But then this morning happened. And now everything is more complicated." She leaned forward. "Miss Chen has just made mathematical history. She will be interviewed by every major publication in our field. She will be recruited by every top graduate program in the world. And when they ask her about her time at this university, what story do you think she's going to tell?" Harrison closed his eyes. "The truth," he said quietly. "She'll tell the truth." "Exactly. Which means this university has a choice to make, and so do you." What the dean proposed next was unprecedented in the university's history. But then again, so was everything that had happened that day. Dean Okonkwo's proposal was simple but profound. "The university will establish a scholarship in Maya Chen's name," she said. "A full scholarship for transfer students from community colleges, the kind of students we have historically overlooked." Harrison nodded slowly. "Additionally, the mathematics department will implement mandatory bias training for all faculty, and you, William, will lead it." "Me? You're uniquely qualified. You've seen firsthand how prejudice can blind us to brilliance. Who better to teach others to avoid the same mistake?" It was, Harrison realized, both a punishment and an opportunity. A chance to transform his failure into something meaningful. "There's one more thing," Dean Okonkwo said. "Miss Chen's proof will be submitted for peer review immediately. If it holds up, and I'm told it will, she will be credited as the sole author, not as a student working under faculty supervision. As an independent mathematician who solved a problem that defeated the best in our field. That's unprecedented." "So is she." The dean stood up. "The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Miss Chen will present her proof to the mathematical community. And you, William, will introduce her." Harrison looked up sharply. "You want me to—" "I want the world to see what accountability looks like. I want them to see that this university acknowledges its failures and celebrates its successes, even when they come from unexpected places." She walked to the door, then turned back. "William, you have a choice. You can let this moment define you as the professor who almost crushed a genius. Or you can let it transform you into someone better." She opened the door. "I suggest you choose wisely." After she left, Harrison sat alone in his office for a long time. He thought about his younger self, the ambitious graduate student who had given up on the Morrison-Hayes conjecture. He thought about all the walls he had built since then, all the students he had dismissed, all the potential he had refused to see. And he thought about Maya Chen, who had forgiven him even when he didn't deserve it. Tomorrow he would stand in front of the world and introduce the woman he had tried to break. It was, he realized, exactly what he needed to do. The press conference the next morning drew more attention than anyone had anticipated, and what happened there would cement Maya Chen's place in history, while delivering a final, unexpected twist. The auditorium was packed. Journalists from the New York Times, the Washington Post, Nature, and Science filled the front rows. Mathematicians had flown in from 3 continents. Maya's parents sat in reserved seats, her father still recovering but determined to witness his daughter's moment. Professor Harrison stepped to the podium. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady despite the cameras flashing. "I'm here to introduce a remarkable young woman. But first, I need to make a confession." The room went quiet. "For 3 months, I treated Maya Chen as if she didn't belong at this university. I dismissed her ideas. I questioned her intelligence. I allowed my own insecurities to manifest as cruelty toward a student who deserved my support." He paused. "I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry, not just to Maya, but to every student I have ever made feel less than worthy." He looked directly at the cameras. "From today forward, I will dedicate myself to ensuring that no student at this institution is ever judged by their background rather than their potential. This is my promise." Then he turned toward the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the woman who solved the Morrison-Hayes conjecture, Miss Maya Chen." Maya walked to the podium to thunderous applause. She looked out at the sea of faces, the journalists, the mathematicians, her parents. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, the sleepless nights, the doubt, the faith that kept her going when everything seemed impossible. "Thank you," she said when the applause finally died down. "I want to start by saying something that might surprise you." She looked at Professor Harrison, who had taken a seat in the front row. "I'm grateful, not just for this moment, but for all of it, including the struggle." She turned back to the audience. God bless everyone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. My parents, who sacrificed everything. My teachers at community college, who saw potential when others saw poverty. And yes, even Professor Harrison, who challenged me in ways that ultimately made me stronger. She smiled. As for the professor himself, I've heard he will be leading the university's new equity initiative. Some might see that as a light consequence, but I see it differently. Her voice grew stronger. He will spend the rest of his career helping students like me find their place in academia. He will never again dismiss someone based on where they came from. And every time he mentors a transfer student, or fights for a scholarship, or speaks against prejudice, he will remember this day. She looked directly at him. That, to me, is justice. Not punishment, but transformation. Not revenge, but redemption. The room erupted in applause, and Professor Harrison, tears streaming down his face, applauded loudest of all. God bless this young woman. God bless her grace. And God bless everyone watching who has ever been told they don't belong. Because Maya Chen just proved that belonging isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim for yourself. And so, my dear friends, we come to the end of our story, but not the end of Maya Chen's journey. Maya Chen's proof of the Morrison-Hayes conjecture was published 6 months later in the Annals of Mathematics, the most prestigious journal in the field. She was credited as sole author. She received offers from every top graduate program in the world. She chose MIT, where Dr. Lawson personally advocated for her admission and became one of her mentors. Her dimensional folding technique is now taught in advanced mathematics courses worldwide. It has already been applied to solve 3 other previously unsolvable problems. The scholarship established in her name has funded 47 transfer students so far. 3 of them have already published original research. Professor William Harrison completed his first year leading the university's equity initiative. By all accounts, he has become one of the most vocal advocates for underrepresented students in academia. He and Maya exchange emails occasionally. She says he's a different man now, and Dr. Eleanor Hayes, at 88 years old, attended Maya's graduation ceremony. She presented Maya with Morrison's original notebook, the one containing the first draft of the conjecture that Maya had solved. "He would have wanted you to have this," Dr. Hayes said. "You finished what we started. You made our work matter." As for Maya's parents, her father's dry cleaning shop reopened last spring. There's a framed copy of Maya's published proof hanging behind the counter. Every customer who asks about it gets the full story. My dear friends, I want to leave you with one final thought. Maya solved the Morrison-Hayes conjecture by doing something no one else had tried. She folded the dimensions. She looked at an old problem from a completely new angle. And I believe that's the real lesson here. Whatever impossible problem you're facing right now, in your career, in your relationships, in your life, maybe the solution isn't about working harder at the same approach. Maybe it's about folding your perspective, looking at it from an angle no one else has tried. Sometimes the breakthrough comes not from being smarter, but from being different. The world is full of people who will tell you that you don't belong, that your dreams are too big, that your background disqualifies you from greatness. Don't believe them, because somewhere out there right now is a young person solving impossible problems at their kitchen table, someone the world has written off, someone waiting for their moment. Maybe that someone is you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. I read every single comment, and it warms my heart to see where you're all watching from. So drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and tell me, what's your impossible problem that you're ready to solve? And remember, God bless you. God bless your dreams, and God bless the impossible problems you're going to solve. Until next time.